They called our world a sanctuary, but a cage made of crystal is still a cage. And we were the songbirds they were teaching to forget how to sing. They didn't brand us with numbers or beat us with rods. The Ethel were far too elegant for such crude displays of power. Theirs was a gentle tyranny, a smothering kindness that was more suffocating than any chain. They came to our home, Xylos, not with warships and fire, but with promises of stillness, of an end to the chaotic symphony of life we had called culture. They told us our emotions were a sickness, our passions a plague, and they, our saviors, had the cure. The cure was a low, pervasive hum that blanketed our cities and fields, a sonic frequency that vibrated in our very bones, sanding down the sharp edges of joy and sorrow until all that remained was a smooth, placid emptiness. They gave us new names, soft, flowing sounds that held no history, and they placed a lumina at the base of our skulls, a tiny, glowing node that pulsed in time with the great hum, a constant reminder of our placid servitude. My name was Kale, but that name was a ghost, a secret I kept buried under the layers of calm they had forced upon me. I remembered the before times, the cacophony of the market square, the thunder of a summer storm, the ragged sound of my own laughter chasing my sister through the tall grass. Now, the only sounds were the whisper of the Ethel's robes as they floated through our immaculate gardens and the synchronized, gentle rhythm of our breathing. We were their prize specimen, a species on the cusp of being perfected, cured of the disease of feeling. My sister, Lyra, was their greatest success. She had been born just as the hum settled over Xylos, so she knew nothing else. Her eyes, which I remembered as wild and full of mischief, were now serene pools of compliance. She moved with a grace that was beautiful and utterly terrifying, her every step in perfect harmony with the silent world the Ethel had built. She was to be the first of us to achieve ascension, the final step in the cure. Ascension was sold to us as a reward, emerging with the Ethel's great stillness, a state of being beyond the vulgar confines of a physical body. We were told it was an honor, the ultimate purpose of our existence. I stood among the others in the Garden of Tranquility, watching Lyra kneel before the High Warden, its form tall and featureless, a being of smooth, white porcelain and cold light. The lumina on Lyra's neck glowed with a brilliant, pure white light, brighter than I had ever seen. The hum intensified, and a feeling of profound peace washed over the crowd, a manufactured bliss that was meant to quell any stray thoughts of loss. But as they led her way toward the spire of serenity, a crack appeared in the placid surface of my mind. A memory, sharp and violent, broke through the hum. Lyra, years ago, screaming with delight as she jumped from a high rock into the river, her body a splash of chaotic energy against the calm water. The memory was so vivid, so loud, it felt like a discordant note in a flawless melody. And it was followed by a feeling I hadn't truly felt in years, a cold, sharp spike of dread. The hum tried to soothe it, to smooth it away, but the crack was there, and the fear was real. That night, I did something no one had done in a generation. I disobeyed. The hum was designed to make the very thought of resistance feel like a painful dissonance. But the memory of Lyra's scream was my anchor in the storm of tranquility. I slipped away from my dwelling, my movements clumsy and loud in the crushing silence. The lumina at my neck pulsed with a dull, punishing ache, a reprimand for my transgression. Every instinct screamed at me to return, to sink back into the comfortable numbness. But the image of my sister's face, serene and empty, drove me onward. I followed the path to the spire, a structure that pierced the sky like a perfect, sterile needle. The Ethel guards floated at their posts, their minds so assured of our compliance that they were more ornaments than sentinels. I found a service conduit, a relic from the before times that they hadn't bothered to remove, and crawled into the guts of their perfect world. The hum was different in here, raw and unfiltered, a physical pressure that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. It was the sound of a billion souls being flattened into one monotonous note. I emerged into a corridor that was not made of the gleaming white material of the public spaces, but of a cold, dark metal that wept with condensation. There was a smell, too, something acrid and organic that the garden's perfumed air had always masked. I followed it to a great circular chamber, the heart of the spire, and the sight within shattered the cage of my mind. There was no great stillness, no ethereal ascension. There were only vats, dozens of them, filled with a shimmering, gelatinous fluid. Suspended within each vat was a human body, pale and still, their luminas glowing softly like captured stars. Tubes and wires snaked from them, siphoning something away. And in the center of the room, on a raised platform, was Lyra. She was not merging with light. She was being unmade. An Ethel warden, a being I now saw not as elegant, but as parasitic, oversaw the process. It held a tool that pulsed with energy, and as it touched the lumina at her neck, her body went rigid. The serene look on her face did not change, but the fluid around her began to cloud, to thicken with a crimson bloom. They were not saving us. They were harvesting us. The emotion, the life force, the chaotic spark they claimed to be curing was a resource, a delicacy they were consuming. The horror was a physical blow. It was a sound so loud in my head that it dwarfed the hum. My lumina flared, not with serene white light, but with a searing, painful red. The sonic dampening shattered. For the first time in years, the full spectrum of my own soul crashed down upon me. Grief, rage, terror, a love for my sister so fierce it was a physical agony. A scream tore from my throat, a raw, ragged sound from a world they had tried to bury. It was the first scream the spire had heard in decades, and it was a sound of pure profanity in this holy place. The warden turned, its featureless face showing no surprise, only a mild curiosity, as if a machine had made an unexpected noise. It raised its tool, but I was already moving, fueled by a primal fury I didn't know I still possessed. I grabbed a discarded metal panel, its edge sharp and jagged, and I charged. I didn't think. I just felt. I brought the panel down on the warden's slender arm, shattering its porcelain-like shell. It made no sound of pain, but it recoiled, its movements for the first time seeming uncertain, clumsy. It had not anticipated violence. It had forgotten the sensation of it. The other Ethel in the room began to float toward me, their movements slow, deliberate, unconcerned. They didn't understand. They thought I was a malfunction, a single broken note. They didn't realize I was a chorus. The rage gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I was chaos unleashed, a storm of motion in their world of stillness. I broke another warden's shell, then another. Their strange, ethereal bodies collapsing like shattered statues. But I knew I couldn't win. They were too many. I glanced back at Lyra, her life force draining away into their machines. And I knew I couldn't save her. But I could make them remember her. I fought my way to the central console that controlled the vats, smashing my fists and the metal panel against its smooth surface until it cracked and sparked. Alarms, silent and psychic, pulsed through the spire, a feeling of deep wrongness that would be felt by every ethel on the planet. I had to flee. I scrambled back through the conduit, my body bruised and broken, my mind a raging inferno. I didn't stop until I was back in the gardens, the serene landscape now looking like a grotesque mockery of peace. I collapsed behind a grove of perfectly sculpted weeping flora, their glowing leaves casting a gentle, indifferent light on my bloody hands. I had failed. Lyra was gone, and soon they would come for me. I was ready to die. I had screamed. I had fought. I had felt. It was more than I had done in years. But then, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, expecting a warden, but it was one of my own people, an old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles that the ethel's treatments had somehow failed to smooth away. Her lumina was dark, a dead thing on her neck. I recognized her from the outer allotments, a quiet woman named Ilara, who mostly kept to herself. She looked down at me, her eyes not filled with the placid emptiness of the others, but with a sharp, ancient intelligence. She knelt beside me, her movements stiff but deliberate. She didn't speak. Instead, she began to hum. It wasn't the all-encompassing drone of the ethel. It was a tune, a real one, with highs and lows, a melody that was jagged and dissonant and achingly familiar. It was a lullaby from the before times, when my mother used to sing. The sound was a key, unlocking rooms in my mind that had been sealed for years. It fought against the ethel hum, creating a space where my own thoughts could breathe. "They fear only one thing," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, so quiet I could barely hear it over the blood pounding in my ears. "Not violence, not rebellion. They fear our noise. They fear the songs we've forgotten." She looked at my hands, at the blood and the dirt, and then into my eyes. "You did not just break their machines, child. You screamed, and a scream is the first note of a brand new song. They will come for you, but they will be looking for a soldier. They will not be listening for a singer." She offered me her hand, her skin as tough as old leather. "Come with me. It is time you learned the rest of the melody." I took her hand, and for the first time since they had stolen my world, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was not hope. Not yet. It was something sharper, something more dangerous. It was harmony, a harmony of rage and memory, a song that I would teach their entire silent, elegant world to sing, whether it wanted to or not. Alara led me not through the manicured pathways of the city, but into its forgotten heart, a place of rust and shadow that existed beneath the ethel's polished veneer. We moved through overgrown service tunnels, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, a scent so real and vital it felt like a rebellion in itself. The ethel's hum was weaker here, a distant thrumming that was more memory than presence. And in its place, I could hear the drip of water, the scuttling of unseen things, the ragged sound of my own breathing. My lumina, which had been a throbbing agony of red, now pulsed with a dull, confused orange, like a dying ember. Ilara's own dark lumina was a void at her neck, a symbol of her freedom. She moved with a purpose that belied her age, her hand a firm grip on my wrist, pulling me deeper into the world they had tried to pave over. We finally arrived at a massive, circular door of pitted metal, a relic from the before times. Ilara didn't use a key. She placed her palm against its cold surface and began to hum again. The same jagged lullaby as before. But this time, another voice joined hers. Then another, coming from within the door itself. A small chorus of defiance. The great door groaned open, not with the silent, effortless glide of ethel technology, but with the protesting shriek of old metal, a sound that was music to my ears. The space beyond was a cavernous chamber, once a central gear house for the old city's mechanics, now a sanctuary for the broken and the remembered. They called it the Resonance Chamber. A few dozen people were scattered throughout the space, their faces etched with lines of worry and sorrow that the hum had never been allowed to erase. They were the echoes, the last remnants of our world's true sound. An old man with hands stained by grease and oil nodded at us from a platform where he tinkered with a strange device of copper coils and wires. This was Jax, the one who kept their world running, the keeper of the old tech. A young woman with wild, unkempt hair and eyes that burned with a feverish intensity watched me from the shadows. Her lumina flickered erratically, a chaotic strobe of colors. Ilara introduced her as Kala. Her lumina had malfunctioned years ago, not dying, but breaking in a way that left her permanently disconnected from the ethel's soothing frequency. She was trapped in a constant storm of raw emotion, a state the ethel would have called madness. But here, it made her a prophet of their cause. She saw my bloody hands and the fury in my eyes, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "He's loud," she said, her voice a low thrum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "He's going to be very, very loud." My welcome was not warm. I was a risk, a raw nerve brought into their fragile haven. I had brought the ethel's attention down upon myself, and by extension, upon them. But Ilara was their matriarch, her word law. She explained what I had seen in the spire, what I had done. The word harvesting settled over the chamber like a shroud, confirming a truth they had long suspected but never witnessed. My rage was no longer just my own. It became a shared fire in the center of their cold, hidden world. My training began the next day, and it was nothing like I expected. It was not about fighting, but about listening. Ilara took me to the deepest part of the chamber, a small, circular room where the echoes of the cavern seemed to converge. She told me to close my eyes and feel. The hum was gone here, completely silenced by Jax's jury-rigged sonic dampeners, and in its absence, the noise inside my own head was a deafening roar. The grief for Lyra was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest. The rage was a white-hot fire behind my eyes. The fear was a cold serpent coiling in my gut. I was drowning in the symphony of myself. "You think your scream was your weapon," Ilara said, her voice calm amidst my internal tempest. It was not. It was just noise, unfocused, wild. It was a cry of pain. The ethel do not fear pain. They feed on it. What they fear is purpose. They fear a song. She taught me to separate the sounds, to identify each emotion as a distinct note in my personal scale. Grief was a low, resonant cello, rage, a piercing violin, love, a warm, swelling chord that was almost too painful to touch. For days, I did nothing but sit in that room and fall apart, letting the waves of feeling wash over me, learning their textures, their tones, their colors. It was an agony. The serene emptiness the ethel had given me had been a mercy I hadn't understood. To feel everything, all at once, after years of feeling nothing, was to be flayed alive. During one session, the memory of Lyra being unmade, the crimson bloom in the vat, became too much. A wave of pure, undiluted fury erupted from me. It was not a sound I made with my mouth, but a psychic scream that shot out from my very being. The lights in the chamber flickered. Calla cried out from the main cavern, clutching her head. Jax's machines whined and sparked. The very rock around us seemed to groan in protest. Alara didn't move. She simply placed her hand on my shoulder, her touch a grounding force. "There," she whispered. "That is your voice. Raw, untamed. Now, you must learn to shape it. You must learn to sing their porcelain shells into dust." While I trained, the world above was changing. The ethel's response to my attack on the spire was as subtle and insidious as their rule. They didn't send enforcers. They didn't announce a manhunt. They simply turned up the volume. The hum that blanketed Xylos grew in intensity. Not enough to be consciously noticed by the placid populace, but enough to deepen their tranquility, to smooth over any lingering ripples of dissonance I might have caused. The gardens seemed more perfect, the people's movements more graceful, their smiles more serene and empty. From the hidden vents that led to the surface, we could see them, our brothers and sisters, walking through their beautiful prison, utterly unaware of the slaughterhouse operating in their midst. The ethel also deployed their seekers. They were not guards or soldiers. They were ethel who had been modified, their senses attuned not to light or sound, but to the discordant frequencies of strong emotion. They floated through the city like silent, white ghosts, their purpose to find and excise any source of true feeling before it could fester. Calla could feel them, their psychic presence like cold needles against her mind. She would pace the chamber, her body tense, muttering warnings. They're close. They're listening for the cracks in the silence. The close call came on a day when my control was at its most fragile. I was trying to hold the note of my grief, to shape it from a crushing weight into a focused point of sound, but it kept collapsing into rage. The two emotions were so intertwined, a double helix of my pain. Frustration mounted, and I let out another uncontrolled burst, a spike of pure, desperate anger. In the main chamber, Calla screamed, "It's here, it heard you." We all felt it then, a psychic pressure at the entrance to our sanctuary, a cold, curious presence that was sniffing at the edges of our silence. The seekers did not see with eyes, they felt with a sense we could barely comprehend. Jax worked frantically at his console, trying to bolster the sonic shields, but they were designed to block the ethel's hum, not to hide a beacon of raw human rage. The seeker was homing in on my emotional signature. "Kal." Alara's voice was urgent, but calm. "They are looking for a soldier, for the rage that broke their machines. Do not give it to them. Sing a different song, a quiet one." I closed my eyes, the cold presence of the seeker a terrifying reality against my mind. It was searching for the fire, for the scream, for the violence. I couldn't hide it, but maybe I could disguise it. I remembered Lyra again, not in the vat, but years before. I remembered a time she had been sick with a fever, and I had sat by her bedside all night, holding her hand. I remembered the feeling, not of rage or grief, but of a desperate, protective love, a quiet, fierce determination to keep her safe, to will the sickness away with my own presence. It was an emotion I hadn't dared to touch in my training. Its purity was too painful. But now, I reached for it. I let the memory fill me, pushing aside the jagged edges of my anger. I focused on the feeling of her small hand in mine, the soft sound of her breathing. I began to hum, not the lullaby of our people, but a new melody, a song of profound, aching stillness. It was the sound of a quiet vigil, of a love that was a shield, not a sword. It was the sound of silence. The psychic pressure at our door wavered. The seeker was confused. It had been following a trail of fire and fury, but all it could feel now was this strange, deep calm, an emotion so pure and selfless it didn't register as a threat. It was a frequency that did not compute with its understanding of rebellion. From my place of deep focus, I could feel its curiosity turn to disinterest. The trail had gone cold. It was looking for a storm, and all it had found was the quiet after the rain. The pressure receded. Kala let out a long, shuddering breath. It's gone. I opened my eyes, sweat pouring down my face, my body trembling with the effort. I had held back a monster not with a shout, but with a whisper. The echoes looked at me with a newfound respect, a flicker of awe in their tired eyes. I was not just a symbol of their rage. I was a weapon, and I was finally learning how to aim. Alara placed a hand on my head, a rare gesture of approval. Good, she said. The first lesson is complete. You have learned to hide in the noise of your own heart. Now, you will learn how to make it a choir. You will teach others to sing. For we are not just going to hide from them, Kyle. We are going to deafen them with the truth. I looked around at the faces in the chamber, the last sparks of life in a dying world, and I knew she was right. My scream had been a solo, but we were about to become an orchestra. The resonance chamber transformed from a sanctuary into a conservatory of rebellion. My role shifted from student to something akin to a choir director, a conductor of dissonant souls. Ilara's theory was simple and terrifying. If a single, uncontrolled scream of emotion could attract a seeker, then a chorus of focused, harmonized emotion could become a weapon, a sonic battering ram that could shatter not just ethel bodies, but the very hum that held our world in its thrall. The echoes were my choir. Each of them was a unique instrument, their dormant feelings a wellspring of untapped power. Jax, the old technician, was a deep, rumbling bass of stubborn resilience, a feeling honed by decades of keeping the old world's embers alive. Kala, the fractured prophet, was a wild, unpredictable piccolo, her notes soaring to heights of ecstatic joy one moment and plunging to depths of shrieking terror the next. There were others, a young man named Ren, whose grief for his ascended parents was a mournful, haunting oboe, a woman, Mara, whose protective love for her young son, born in the shadows of the chamber, was a warm, enveloping cello. My job was to teach them to play. It was a painstaking process. I had them sit in the small, circular room, one by one, and guided them through the same excruciating process of self-discovery I had endured. I taught them to listen to the noise within, to separate the strands of their own hearts, to feel the textures of sorrow and joy, fear and love, not as chaotic impulses, but as controllable frequencies. For most, the hardest part was simply letting go. The ethel's hum had been a constant, comforting blanket for so long that the raw, unfiltered reality of their own emotions was a terrifying nakedness. There were tears and fits of rage. Ren's grief was so profound that during his first session, the very metal of the walls seemed to weep with condensation. Mara's love was so fierce it manifested as a wave of protective warmth that made the air in the chamber feel thick and heavy. But slowly, painstakingly, they learned. They learned to find the note of their own pain and hold it, to shape it, to give it purpose. Our first attempts at harmony were disastrous. Imagine an orchestra where every musician is playing a different song in a different key at the top of their lungs. That was us. A cacophony of raw, psychic noise that left us all with splitting headaches and frayed nerves. Calla was often the first to break, her own fractured mind unable to shield itself from the emotional bleed of others. During one particularly chaotic session, she collapsed, her body convulsing as she was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of our collective, unfocused feelings. It was clear we needed more than just volume. We needed a conductor, a focal point. That burden fell to me. Elara and Jax devised a plan, using the strange device of copper coils and wires I had seen him tinkering with. Jax constructed what he called a focus. It was a central pillar in the main chamber, wired to my body through a series of contact pads on my temples and chest. The theory was that I could act as a living amplifier and filter, drawing in their individual emotional frequencies, harmonizing them within myself, and then projecting the combined force as a single, coherent wave. The first time we tried, it was the most terrifying experience of my life. As the echoes began to project their chosen emotions towards me, Ren's grief, Jax's resilience, Mara's love, it felt like 1,000 needles being driven into my brain. My mind became a battleground for their feelings, each one fighting for dominance. I was drowning in them, my own consciousness being torn apart by the sheer volume of their souls. I felt Ren's loss as if my own parents had just been taken. I felt Mara's fierce love for her son as if he were my own child. I was on the verge of blacking out, my own identity dissolving into the chorus. Then I heard Elara's voice, not spoken aloud, but a clear, calm thought in the storm of my mind. Do not fight them. Kyle, guide them. Find the root. Find the song they all share. The root, the common thread. I searched through the chaos, through the grief and the anger and the love, and I found it. It was the one thing that bound us all. The emotion that had been the seed of our entire rebellion. It was the memory of loss. We had all lost someone to the Ethel's false promise of ascension. My sister, Ren's parents, Jax's wife, Mara's partner. It was our shared wound, our collective scar. I latched onto that feeling. I didn't try to silence the other emotions, but I used the shared grief as a tuning fork, a central key to which all our other notes could be harmonized. I wove Ren's mournful oboe with Mara's protective cello, creating a chord that was both sorrowful and defiant. I grounded it with the deep, steady bass of Jax's resilience. I even managed to capture the wild, shrieking piccolo of Kala's madness intemperate, turning her raw terror into a sharp, piercing note of warning. The chaos in my head began to coalesce. It was no longer a storm. It was a symphony. A terrible, beautiful symphony of loss and defiance. The focus pillar began to glow. A soft, pulsating blue light that filled the chamber. The very air vibrated with our collective will. We held the note for only a few seconds before I collapsed. The connection breaking, but we had done it. We had created our weapon. Our target was a substation, a smaller version of the spire located in the industrial sector of the city. It was a processing node, a place where the ethel siphoned the ambient emotional energy of the workers and channeled it towards the main spire. It was less guarded, a weaker link in their chain of consumption. Our plan was not to destroy it with explosives, but to overload it with a sound it was not designed to handle. We would not give them rage or violence, the very things they harvested. We would give them a song of pure, focused grief, an emotion so antithetical to their nature that we hoped it would shatter their systems. The mission was a blur of shadows and adrenaline. Jax used his knowledge of the old city to guide us through a network of forgotten aqueducts that led directly beneath the substation. There, in a small, cramped maintenance tunnel, we set up our choir. I was wired to the portable focus, a smaller, cruder version of the one in our chamber. The echoes gathered around me, their faces pale and determined in the dim light of our glow strips. Remember your loss, I whispered, my voice echoing in the confined space. Do not let it consume you. Let it become your voice. Let them hear the names of those they have taken. I closed my eyes and reached out, drawing their feelings into me. The symphony of grief rose again, but this time it was more controlled, more focused. It was the sound of 1,000 unshed tears, of 1,000,000 unspoken goodbyes. It was the sound of memory, a concept the ethel had tried to erase. Through the focus, I projected the wave of sound upwards, not as a physical vibration, but as a psychic one. I aimed it at the core of the substation, at the heart of their harvesting machine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, we heard it. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the structure above us, a sound of stressed machinery, of a system encountering an error it could not comprehend. The lights in our tunnel flickered. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The ethel's hum, which had been a constant, oppressive presence even this deep, began to stutter, to fracture. It was like hearing a perfect, single note suddenly break into 1,000 discordant shards. Then came the psychic scream. It was not human. It was the sound of the ethel within the substation, their placid, controlled minds being torn apart by an emotion they had no defense against. It was the sound of a parasite being force-fed poison. The whine from above grew to a deafening shriek, and then, with a deep, resonant boom that shook the very foundations of the tunnel, it stopped. The hum was gone. In its place was a silence that was more profound, more absolute than any quiet I had ever known. It was not the imposed stillness of the ethel. It was the true silence of a machine that has died. We had done it. We had severed a part of their network. As we scrambled back through the aqueducts, the first signs of the fallout were already visible. Through a grate that opened to the surface, we saw people in the industrial sector stopping in their tracks, a look of profound confusion on their faces. The constant, soothing hum that had governed their entire lives was gone. For the first time, They were hearing the silence. Some clutched their heads, as if in pain. Others simply stood still, their eyes wide, as if waking from a long dream. The Ethel would not be confused for long. They would repair the damage. They would find the source, but we had proven it was possible. We had shown them that our feelings were not their food. They were our ammunition. And as we returned to the resonance chamber, to the triumphant, tear-streaked faces of our fellow echoes, I knew this was just the overture. The symphony of our revolution had just begun. The silence we created in the industrial sector did not last. Within a day, the Ethel had rerouted their network, and the oppressive hum settled back over the district, perhaps even stronger than before. A parent hushing a child who had dared to speak out of turn. But the damage was done, not to their infrastructure, but to their ideology. For a brief, glorious moment, thousands of people had felt the hum disappear. They had been exposed to the raw, unfiltered reality of their own quiet minds, and that is a sensation, once experienced, that can never be truly forgotten. It planted a seed of dissonance in the placid garden of their society. Reports filtered down to us through Jax's network of hidden sensors and sympathetic whispers from the surface told of strange occurrences. Workers would pause at their stations, a flicker of memory in their eyes. People were seen touching the Luminas at their necks with a newfound, questioning curiosity. A child was heard humming a tune that was not one of the Ethel's approved, monotonous melodies. These were small things, tiny cracks in the porcelain facade of their perfect world. But to us, they were earthquakes. The Ethel's response was swift and chilling. They introduced the harmonizers, Ethel who were not seekers of emotion, but broadcasters of tranquility. They moved through the populace in silent, graceful processions, their very presence projecting a wave of intensified calm that smothered the fledgling sparks of individuality before they could catch fire. They were shepherds, gently nudging their flock back into the fold. For every crack we made, they applied a new layer of glaze. It became a silent, invisible war, a war of frequencies and feelings. We would use our symphony of grief to create a brief pocket of silence in a residential block, and they would counter with a wave of manufactured contentment. We were fighting a tide with a bucket, and I knew we couldn't win this way. We needed to escalate. We needed to move beyond simply disrupting their network. We needed to hijack it. The plan was Kala's, born from the chaotic storm of her fractured mind. She spoke of the hum not as a blanket, but as a river, a current of psychic energy that flowed from the spire to every lumina on the planet. "We keep trying to dam the river," she'd said, her eyes alight with a feverish glow, "but they just flow around us. What we need to do is poison the water. We need to sing our song into their current." The idea was audacious to the point of insanity. We would not create silence. We would broadcast our own symphony, our anthem of grief and memory, directly into the Ethel's network, using every Lumina-wearing citizen as an unwilling receiver. We wouldn't just be waking them up, we'd be forcing them to feel our pain, our loss, our rage, all at once. The target was the central relay spire in the heart of the city. A smaller, but more critical, version of the main spire. It was the nexus through which all the hum's frequencies were calibrated and distributed. If we could seize it, even for a moment, we could broadcast our symphony to the entire city. The mission required a different kind of infiltration. We couldn't just sneak into the basement. We had to get to the very top of the spire, to the broadcast antenna itself. And for that, we needed a distraction, something loud and messy that would draw the Ethel's attention away from our true objective. This time, our weapon would not be grief. It would be fear. This was my greatest challenge yet. Fear was an emotion we had all suppressed, a primal instinct that the hum had been designed to eradicate. To weaponize it, we had to dredge up our deepest terrors, the things that lurked in the dark corners of our minds, and project them not as a focused beam, but as a chaotic, disorienting fog. The distraction team was led by Ren, his quiet grief now tempered with a cold, hard resolve, while they prepared to unleash a psychic storm of pure panic on the city's main plaza. My team, consisting of myself, Jax, and a nimble young scout named Kian, would make for the relay spire. As I wired myself to the portable focus, I instructed Ren's team, "Don't think of monsters or darkness. Think of the moment you knew you were helpless, the moment you realized you were in a cage and the door was locked. That is true fear. Give them that." As we moved through the service tunnels, we felt it begin. A wave of psychic static washed over the city, a feeling of deep, primal dread. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was a creeping, insidious whisper that bypassed the hum's soothing frequencies and spoke directly to the lizard brain. We saw its effects through the grates. People stopped, their placid smiles faltering. They looked around with a new, hunted expression, as if they suddenly felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. Ethel harmonizers, who had been floating serenely through the crowds, now paused, their movements becoming jerky, uncertain. They could feel the fear, but they couldn't identify its source. And that in itself was a terrifying dissonance for their ordered minds. The plaza erupted into a quiet, graceful chaos. People weren't screaming or running. They were simply moving away from each other, their movements filled with a new, frantic urgency. It was the perfect diversion. The relay spire was less guarded than we expected, most of its sentinels having been drawn towards the growing panic in the plaza. Jax, with a lifetime's knowledge of the old city's schematics, bypassed the security locks with a series of clicks and whirs from a handheld device. We were in. The inside of the spire was a vertical climb, a ladder of cold metal rungs that ascended into a dizzying vortex of light and energy. The hum was so powerful here, it was a physical force, a crushing weight that threatened to pulp our minds back into a state of placid obedience. I had to focus, to use Alara's training to create a pocket of mental silence around us, a shield against the overwhelming tranquility. We reached the apex, a small, circular chamber with a panoramic view of the city below. In the center was the broadcast antenna, a crystalline structure that pulsed with the soft, white light of the hum. This was the city's heart, and we were about to give it a fatal arrhythmia. Jax worked quickly, attaching his device to the base of the antenna. "This will create a momentary feedback loop," he said, his knuckles white as he tightened the final connection. "It will open the network for less than a minute. That's all the time you have, Kyle. After that, the system will purge itself, and we'll be fried." I nodded, my own heart pounding in my chest. I placed my hands on the focus, which was now directly wired to Jax's device. I closed my eyes and reached out, not to Ren's team, but back to the resonance chamber, to Alara and Mara and the others who formed the core of our choir. They were our orchestra, and I was their conductor. The song they gave me was not of grief or fear. It was the anthem we had been practicing for weeks, a complex symphony that wove together every thread of our rebellion. It began with the low, mournful notes of our collective loss, the memory of our stolen families. Then, it swelled with the defiant chords of our resilience, the stubborn refusal to be erased. It was layered with the fierce, protective love we had for each other and for the memory of our world. And, finally, soaring above it all, was a new note, one we had only recently learned to sing. It was the sound of hope, a dangerous, fragile, but fiercely bright note that promised a future beyond the silence. "Now, Jax," I yelled. He threw a switch, and the world went white. The feedback loop opened. For a single, terrifying moment, I was connected to every single Lumina in the city. I felt the placid emptiness of a million minds, a vast, silent ocean of consciousness. And then, I unleashed the storm. I pushed our symphony into that ocean. It was like shouting into a cathedral. The song erupted from the antenna, not as a sound, but as a wave of pure, unadulterated feeling. It washed over the city, a psychic tidal wave that crashed against the carefully constructed dams of a million minds. For the first time, the people of Xylos felt something other than what they were told to feel. They felt our pain. They felt our defiance. They felt our hope. I saw it not with my eyes, but in the sudden, brilliant flare of light that swept across the cityscape below. The Luminas, which had always glowed with a placid white, began to flicker and change. They erupted into a chaotic aurora of colors, red flares of anger, blue waves of sorrow, brilliant gold bursts of hope. The city, which had been a monochrome of tranquility, was now a canvas of vibrant, chaotic emotion. The hum didn't just stutter, it shattered. It was replaced by a new sound, the sound of a million minds waking up at once. It was a roar. Our minute was almost up. The antenna began to spark violently, the system fighting back, preparing to purge. "We have to go," Jax screamed, pulling the wires free. We scrambled back down the ladder, the spire groaning around us as if in its death throes. As we descended, I looked out at the city. The quiet chaos in the plaza had been replaced by something else. People were not just moving frantically anymore. They were looking at each other, really looking at each other, for the first time in years. They were seeing the shared confusion, the shared pain, the shared dawning of a terrible truth in each other's eyes. They were connecting. I saw an ethel harmonizer, its body flickering as if its form was destabilizing, being surrounded not by a mob, but by a crowd of people who were simply staring at it, their collective, newfound emotion a force that was pushing back against its aura of calm. We had not just poisoned the river, we had taught the entire city to sing our song. And as we fled back into the shadows of the underbelly, I knew that the ethel's beautiful, silent world was coming to an end. The age of echoes was over. The age of the chorus had begun. The symphony's last note hung in the psychic air like the aftershock of a tectonic rupture, leaving a city in beautiful, terrible disarray. The ethel's monolithic hum was gone, replaced by the cacophony of a million individual consciousnesses awakening simultaneously. It was not a joyous awakening. It was a violent birth, a brutal expulsion from the warm, placid womb of ignorance into the cold, harsh light of truth. From the relative safety of the resonance chamber, we watched the city tear itself apart not with violence, but with feeling. People wept openly in the streets, mourning for loved ones they suddenly remembered had been ascended. Others stared at their own hands, flexing their fingers as if discovering them for the first time, overwhelmed by the sheer, visceral sensation of being alive in their own bodies. Fights broke out, not from malice, but from the clumsy, explosive release of a lifetime of suppressed frustration. The Ethel were in retreat. Their serene, floating forms were now discordant elements in a landscape of emotional chaos. The raw, untamed feelings of the populace were a corrosive acid to their ordered minds. We saw them flicker and distort, their porcelain shells cracking under the psychic pressure before they dissolved into motes of light and vanished, retreating to the one place their power was still absolute, the main spire. Our victory was intoxicating, but Ilara's sober voice cut through our celebration. An animal is never more dangerous than when it is cornered, she warned, her ancient eyes fixed on the image of the spire, which now seemed to glow with a malevolent, intensified light. They are not gone. They are gathering. They will not just turn the hum back on. They will burn the rot from their garden. And we are the rot. She was right. The Ethel were preparing a purge, not a subtle broadcast of tranquility, but a sonic wave of such overwhelming purity and power that it would not just soothe, but scour. It would burn the new pathways of feeling from every mind, lobotomizing the entire city and leaving behind a populace of truly empty shells, perfect and silent forever. We had only one choice, a final, desperate charge on the main spire itself, the heart of their power, the source of their parasitic existence. It was no longer a mission of infiltration or sabotage. It was an assault. The entire city became our army. We were not generals. We were conduits. Kala, Ren, and I, along with a handful of the other most powerful echoes, spread out through the city, acting as focal points. We didn't give orders. We shared intent. We projected the plan to march on the spire, to lend every voice to a final, overwhelming chorus, and the newly awakened populace responded. They were drawn to us, their chaotic emotions finding a magnetic north in our focused purpose. My group swelled from a handful to hundreds, then thousands, a river of raw humanity flowing through the pristine streets. Their faces were a mixture of terror and elation. They were armed with nothing but their own broken hearts and the furious, beautiful noise of their own souls. The march to the spire was a pilgrimage of the damned and the reborn. As we drew closer, the Ethel's counterattack began. A low, powerful hum started to emanate from the spire, a frequency so deep and resonant it felt like the planet itself was groaning. It was a wave of pure order, a psychic bulldozer designed to flatten the chaotic landscape of our minds. People faltered. The raw, new feelings they had just discovered were assaulted by this wave of crushing stillness. Some clutched their heads and fell to their knees, the blissful peace of their old existence attempting siren song. Don't listen, I projected, my own mind reeling from the force of the wave. Remember what they took from you. Sing your pain. Sing your loss. Make a noise so loud it drowns them out. I focused on Lyra, on the crimson bloom in the vat, the source of my own personal scream. I wrapped my grief and rage around me like armor and pushed back against the wave. The thousands following me felt my defiance. A woman near me, who had been weeping for her lost son, channeled her sorrow into a piercing, keening wail that cut through the ethel's hum like a shard of glass. A man who had been a placid worker his whole life roared with the frustration of 1,000 wasted days. The wave of stillness faltered, beaten back by the sheer, messy reality of our combined humanity. We reached the base of the spire, a vast, circular plaza. The entrance was guarded not by floating sentinels, but by a single ethel. It was larger than the others, its form radiating an ancient and immense power. This was the High Warden, the being that had overseen Lyra's final moments. It did not speak with a voice, but its thoughts pressed down on us, cold and clear as crystal. You are a disease, a cacophony in a silent universe. We offered you perfection. You have chosen noise. You will be corrected. The final battle was not one of flesh and bone, but of song against silence. The High Warden was the conductor of the Ethel's symphony of order, and I was the conductor of humanity's chaotic orchestra. I wired myself to the last portable focus we had, its power core already glowing hot. The echoes and thousands of citizens formed a circle around me, their faces turned towards the spire, their minds open. The High Warden raised its arms, and the purge wave hit us with the force of a physical explosion. It was a sound of absolute, soul-crushing silence, a void that sought to extinguish the very concept of self. I felt minds around me beginning to fray, the delicate new tapestry of their emotions threatening to unravel. I had to give them an anchor, a song stronger than the silence. I didn't give them grief or rage. I gave them joy. I reached deep inside myself, past the pain and the loss, to the memories of the before times. I found the memory of Lyra's laughter, that wild, chaotic sound of pure, unadulterated delight. It was the most painful and beautiful note in my entire being. I took that single, perfect sound, and I broadcasted it, amplified by the focus, into the hearts of everyone present. Remember this. I sang into their minds. Remember the feeling of the sun on your face. Remember the taste of clean water. Remember the sound of a child's laughter. This is what they tried to steal. This is what we are fighting for. It was a jolt of pure life against the encroaching void. The wave of joy spread through the crowd, a wildfire of memory and hope. People began to laugh, a sound that had been absent from our world for a generation. It was a broken, tear-streaked, defiant laughter, and it was the most powerful weapon we had ever possessed. The sound of our joy, a billion chaotic, individual notes of it, crashed against the High Warden's perfect silence. Its form began to flicker violently. The spire itself seemed to groan, its crystalline structure vibrating as it was filled with an energy it was never designed to contain. For the first time, the High Warden projected an emotion of its own confusion, and beneath that, something else, something akin to fear. It could not comprehend our weapon. Joy was a data error, a logical impossibility in its ordered universe. We pushed harder, our laughter turning into a roar of triumphant life. The High Warden's form shattered, not into light, but into a million shards of dull, lifeless crystal that rained down on the plaza. With its conductor gone, the spire's song died. A final psychic scream echoed from its peak, and then the structure went dark and silent, a dead needle against the sky. The hum was gone, not just paused, not just broken, but utterly and completely gone. A true and final silence fell over the city, but this time, it was our silence. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, waiting to begin again. In the aftermath, I did not become a leader. The age of conductors was over. I was just Kyle again, a man who had lost his sister but had helped a world find its voice. The people of Xylos had to learn to live with their own noise, to navigate the messy, beautiful, terrifying landscape of their own hearts. It would be a long and difficult process, a new kind of harmony to be learned. I walked away from the cheering crowds, away from the dawning of the new era. I found my way to the river where Lyra used to play, the one from my memory. The water still flowed, chaotic and loud, over the rocks. I sat on the bank and listened to its song. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't try to shape the sound. I didn't try to turn it into a weapon or a shield. I just let it wash over me, a simple, perfect note in the brand new symphony of my world. The silence was over. It was time to learn how to listen again.